So good evening, everyone that's attending this event. Appreciate your participation. As most of you know, we used to do this monthly a couple of years ago, but we moved to a quarterly event. We did in December the Federal Communications Commission. And this quarter, in this day, we are doing the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we're doing two different federal agencies in 3 months. And we have a very interesting panel of experts. Assistant Director Michael Paul is with us. And we have two experts of his, Derek Calloway and Walt Lyons. So I'm going to let Assistant Director Paul introduce himself. Before that, I want to mention that Barney Scholl, RCA's counsel and vice president, is with us, and he will forward the audience questions that we received through Amy a few days ago. So Assistant Director Paul, please tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to be with Radio Club of America tonight and be featured on your session. We're honored to be here with you and share a little bit about the FBI and its radio and technology programs. As John mentioned, my name is Michael Paul. I'm the FBI's Assistant Director for our Operational Technology Division, which is headquartered at Quantico, Virginia, on the Marine Corps base there, along with our training academy, our laboratory, and our critical incident response group. A little bit about my background. I've been with the organization 28 years this year. I started as an intern in 1994. I had a mentor in high school that was father of a classmate of mine. And he helped to create that desire to, pursue a career with the FBI. And he helped me navigate sort of the process of getting involved with the internship and competing to actually get a spot and sort of begin my career. So I'm thankful to Don Clemmer's his name. He's still up in the Michigan area, long retired, but enjoying a well-earned retirement. So I was an intern in 1994. That was while I was finishing my undergraduate degree at Bowling Green State University. I was pursuing a degree in criminal justice. And then I went right to work for the FBI following graduation as a management analyst in our professional staff. And I spent time for the next few years working in our Criminal Justice Information Services Division, conducting audits in collaboration with state and local law enforcement that had their work with our National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. This is where the state and locals have their wanted person records, their stolen vehicles, their missing persons, and a variety of other more modern files since then, and how we exchange information and help law enforcement tracking those matters. So I spent about 3 years in that division, and then I was picked up to go to the academy, not before doing some graduate work at West Virginia University in public administration and education. And then I headed off to the academy and was signed out to our Detroit field office. That was home for me. I grew up in Michigan, somewhat of a rarity to be able to get back home. And so I did 6 years there in Detroit. 9/11 occurred during that time period, and I was part of the crew that was transitioned from sort of traditional criminal investigative work in the FBI to focusing on that, emerging terrorism issue. And so I worked counterterrorism there until about 2005. I was a member of our SWAT team there, our hazardous evidence response team, and I was also part of our emergency medical crew there. And then I headed off to FBI headquarters. I was promoted to be a headquarters supervisor, and I went up to work counterterrorism matters there at headquarters, eventually moving into weapons of mass destruction work, and was detailed over to the CIA for a few years. We were working primarily international terrorism folks that were dabbling in weapons of mass destruction around the globe and trying to prevent, obviously, those threat actors and threats from coming to the United States. When I was finished with that tour, I was promoted out to our Cleveland office And there I oversaw a joint terrorism task force that worked primarily domestic terrorism matters, special events work there in the Cleveland area. We had responsibility for the airport there at Cleveland Hopkins, and a variety of other sort of threat-related work. I promoted out of Cleveland then to our Norfolk field office, where I became an assistant special agent in charge, overseeing our national security programs there. Norfolk is a big counterintelligence center because of the big military defense industrial base there. And really all 5 branches of the military being very active in the port and the surrounding areas. And so I oversaw counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and our crisis response assets there in the Norfolk field office. Following that, I promoted back to FBI headquarters as the section chief of our domestic terrorism operations section. That was in 2016. I was greeted immediately in that position by the takeover of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge out in Oregon that some of you may remember. That was my first 2 months there working in the domestic terrorism program. And then I settled in and covered a number of other incidents, including the attack at Charlottesville, the Mandalay Bay shootings in Las Vegas, the police officer killings in Dallas and Baton Rouge, and a number of other incidents. Following my work there in that operational division, I switched over to a technology division. We actually retooled a portion of our counterterrorism division to deal with data exploitation, data analysis, and exploitation of communication selectors. And so I spent some time there, and really that was my first introduction to real technical work in the FBI. Following that time, I went out, was assigned as our special agent in charge in the Minneapolis field office, which has responsibility for Minnesota and North and South Dakota. I went out right at the tail end of the violent civil unrest there in Minneapolis, and was present for the tail end of those riots and a number of other incidents that happened after that surrounding law enforcement use of force, the trials of the police officers that were involved in the killing of George Floyd. Super interesting, challenging time to be there in Minneapolis, and also, separately a great experience learning about our activities in North and South Dakota. Talk about some wide open areas where radio communications are very important because cell tower coverage is limited. And general resources are limited between towns and cities. And then I came back to headquarters, was very lucky to be promoted into this position as the assistant director of the operational technology division, and coming back into a very technology oriented position here. And I've been here about 6 months now, starting to get my feet underneath me. And I'm lucky to have Walt Lyons with me here tonight, our senior manager for our land mobile radio program, and also Derek Calloway, one of our telecommunications managers. And they've been helping me learn the ropes here and explore all the broad things that the operational technology division does, even beyond communications and radio.
Wow. Well, that's a very impressive background and a lot of different posts that you've had along the way. By the way, you mentioned NCIC, and you may be interested to know, all 3 of you, I don't know if you know the name Chief Harlan McEwen, but Harlan is a long-term, actually it's a life RCA member and a fellow. And way back when, he was in the FBI and helped work on the NCIC system. So believe it or not, we even have a law enforcement person with us that had that experience. So if I can move to Derek. Derek, could you give me a little bit of your background so that everybody can understand what you've done, please?
Sure. As Mr. Paul said, my name is Derek Calloway. I'm one of the telecommunications managers in the operational technology division, and the specific unit is the radio engineering unit. To give a little background on myself, I went to Capital College University in Laurel, Maryland, where I received a Bachelor of Science of Engineering, Electrical Engineering in 2007. From there, I went to work for a defense contractor called ITT Communications. We specialize in creating IEDs to help thwart, IED jammers to help thwart IUD bombs for the military. And in 2011, I came and joined the FBI, came to the radio unit, and been with the radio unit since 2011 in the Bureau. So not as extensive a background as Mr. Paul, but I've loved my career so far in the Bureau.
Well, that's great, Derek. Thank you. Walt, your turn, I think.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, AD Paul, for this opportunity. Like a lot of folks probably in RCA, I started my electronics and radio career back in the mid 70s. I've been with the government for 42 years. Been around ham radio, CB radios, and then I did something crazy and I joined the Marine Corps. And that was the career of all the electronics, the start of that. So I was an electronic technician and spent 16 years enlisted, and then I became an officer, and I was a communication maintenance officer. And from there, I retired in 2001, and I went to work for another government. And I had actually hosted Operational Technology Division to come look at a program that I was doing. They were impressed with the program and started to dangle that carrot out. So I took the carrot and I joined the FBI about 15 years ago for there, and started off as a program manager. It was a classified program, and within 1 week, I got called into my chief's office, and she said, "I'm handing you the keys. You are now the program manager for this project." Unbeknownst to me, it was a 5i project. So I got thrown into the mix pretty quick. From there, I was a program manager for Secure Technologies, and then I became a supervisor of that technologies program, along with the land mobile radio subscribers. And then I was promoted to, I'm professional staff with Derek. GS15, I'm the chief of the radio engineering unit. So we handle all of the land mobile radio that's in CONUS and US territories. Everything from radio subscribers to infrastructure, and everything in between to make that work.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That's a good start. So one of you, please give us a very brief background and history of the Operational Technology Division and exactly what that means, please.
Sure, John. So we can trace the beginnings of the FBI's Operational Technology Division, or OTD, as we like to say. We're good government folks. We love our acronyms. We trace OTD back probably its early beginnings into the early 30s. Looking back at Bureau history, in 1932, there was an entity called the Technical Laboratory. And we see that's where the FBI starts to get into technical work, sort of as an outgrowth of our other laboratory forensic work that was budding at that time as well. And so by 1942, the FBI was up and running with its first radio stations, not good time radio stations, but these were radio stations set up covertly to monitor for Nazi communications. The first of which was on a small farm outside of Clinton, Maryland. By 1952, the program grew more, and then we saw the beginnings, the first units that emerge, which is sort of that's our core operating unit. That's probably 12 to 15 people, sometimes larger. And we actually had a true by name radio engineering unit and also an electrical unit. And so those two units started working much more diligently on specifically radio communications to support our operations. There were a number of name changes, and as you can imagine, evolution over the years. After After 9/11, there was some significant reconsideration of the FBI structure, looking at different elements across the Bureau. And so we were specifically split out from the laboratory division into our own division at the time that was called it was our Investigative Technologies Division. And so again, some other tweaks and name changes. And then about 3 years after that, in 2005-ish, we actually got our Operational Technology Division name, and we were also headquartered then at Quantico in our Engineering Research Facility, or ERF, which is currently the main home of OTD, although we have some other facilities, other places. But that's a little bit of the lineage behind OTD.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So I have the next two questions are broken up in terms of challenges that faces OTD, current challenges, and then after that, future challenges. So I'll leave it to the three of you to decide who takes what part of the question. But we should start with the current challenges right today. What's challenging you?
Good. I think we have a couple items. Walt, do you have anything at the front of mind?
No, sir. I think the same challenges with us, obviously, is we have to stick to federal standards. So a lot of times our challenges with the vendors, they don't understand that the FBI is a little more stringent sometimes when it comes to our standards, with our cyber security, with our encryption, things like that.
I think that's a good point, Walt. You know, we do adhere to FISMA and FIP standards when it comes to cybersecurity. And so while we're always looking to develop our technologies, adopt new technologies, be more efficient, make services more available to the FBI workforce, we're always challenged by ensuring that those, solutions remain secure. And sometimes, as you know, there's a balance there in efficiencies and practicality and convenience with security. Another challenge we have right now that I think is also probably similar to a lot of other folks is maintaining our technical talent. Folks like Walt and Derek aren't easy to come by. That the STEM talent, our ability to recruit and retain folks that have those backgrounds is a challenge for us. And so we have some specific recruiting initiatives that are up and running actually right now, John, where we're hoping to bring in some new electronics technicians. And so we have some promotional materials out on our website, fbijobs.gov, where we're trying to encourage folks that have that science and technology background to consider careers with the FBI, just like Walt and Derek did, bringing in expertise, whether it's bringing in significant experience from other careers or whether it's coming in as a new professional right out of a trade school with an electronics degree or an electrical engineering degree. We're looking for those folks to consider coming to the FBI because that is hard talent for us to retain. And then the third area I would highlight is, we're continually challenged by what we like to call lawful access, or some folks may have heard if they're tracking issues with law enforcement access to digital evidence and digital media. It's been referred to in the past as going dark. But we're talking a lot now about lawful access and looking at all the technologies that are being fielded by providers. They're being fielded in a way that is designed to protect privacy and to provide security through encryption and through cybersecurity. But the government requires some access in order to maintain rule of law, in order to investigate crimes, and ultimately to protect national security. We need some access to what is increasingly digital data and digital communications. And so that's a challenge for us too, because we are in the business of protecting civil liberties and privacy. We're also in the business of protecting citizens from crime and threats.
Makes sense. You will be pleased to know that RCA for decades now, has been working very hard on the problem of getting younger people to consider wireless careers. So I don't want to belabor that. Most of the people watching are aware of our efforts in that direction, and we've actually increased them in the last few years, bringing women, a specific focus on women and college students. Okay, that's great. So how about the future? What kind of problems do you all anticipate in the future?
Well, I'm wondering if you or Derek could touch on, we have a blend of wireless communications in the eye. We've mentioned the land mobile radio. We should mention too, like many other folks, like we all do in our personal lives, we're using cellular technology, certainly, for more administrative communications. And then we're using, more in special circumstances, HF radio and satellite. But maybe you or Derek could address like sort of our thoughts about our aspirations to meld some of these technologies and the challenges that come with that.
I'll take it, Walt. Yes, sir. Director Paul is exactly right. There's a growing challenge and a growing need to combine both land mobile radio with cellular technologies, and that's something that, from an industry standpoint, there aren't standards defined yet to bridge those two technologies together. And I know over time, as the personnel gets younger and younger from a technology standpoint, most folks are used to using cell phones. And that's becoming a more convenient way to communicate from a communication standpoint and from a law enforcement standpoint. So from an FBI standpoint, that's where we are looking to develop the technology and continue to work with the industry to meld those two technologies together in a secure fashion. Yes, it can be done easily, but as Mr. Paul mentioned, like we do have a balance that we have to follow as far as operational security requirements to meet our overall needs. So we'll continue to look at tools that we can use to aid in our law enforcement communication. We will always see land mobile radio as our primary source of communication, but there will also be tools that we can use to aid in the usage of land mobile radio. And we look to hopefully in the future having LTE or having cellular devices would be an option for us down the road.
Okay, that's good. So building on what you both said, we have people in the audience that are users of HF radio. We have some satellite people that are satellite savvy. And of course, we have people like myself that grew up in the land mobile arena. So could you elaborate, one of you elaborate a little bit more on your use of satellites and HF radio? I wouldn't have expected the HF actually, but I'm interested.
Yes, I could take the HF part. We do participate in the shares program. So we have HF radio in every field office. We just went through a refresh, and we're also on the brink of also bringing AES 256 into that, so that our audio and our data can be encrypted as well. That is primarily used for, as you know, long-range communication, emergency situations. For our satellites, we do put satellite radio that is primarily only used as a last resort backup during natural disasters and things like that. It's not used, the ones that we deploy from the radio program is not used as a primary means of day-to-day communication.
Got it. Okay. And on the LMR side, I know that you have a nationwide network. Is that correct? I assume that's a VHF?
Yes, sir. Primary nationwide network would be a VHF conventional system.
Okay, conventional.
Yeah,
okay,
and John, if I could, I would just say, that's another, we could probably count that as a challenge, but it's definitely another priority for us, right? As well, we do have our own nationwide network, especially since 9/11. There's been a strong focus on interoperability. amongst federal agencies, and certainly, especially with our federal and state and local partners across the country. And your audience will know certainly a variety of LMR technologies at play across those state and local systems, some of which have more extensive networks or better funded networks than others. And so Derek and Walt, they spent a lot of time working on that interoperability piece and trying to make sure that we can communicate. While we primarily are using that VHF, we've got to be able to communicate with 800 megahertz trunking systems, yada yada. And so I think there's been a lot of progress made, certainly during my career. Again, after 9/11, we had pretty rudimentary capabilities to patch systems together. But I think that will always be a challenge for us. And with that comes significant cost, right? Even though we're a well-funded federal organization, still a lot of cost that comes with making sure that, as many people can talk with each other under as many circumstances as possible.
Understood. So for the future, what kind of improvements would you like to see in those systems, the LMR systems, the satellites, and the HF networks?
For LMR radio and for interoperability, like Mr. Paul just talked about, in addition to a great challenge, as you know, the federal systems are mandated to use AES encryption. The first responders and state and locals, they sometimes cannot afford to have systems that have AES 256. So some of the challenges talking from our encryption down to their lower encryption and that interoperability poses great challenges. So we've been working with industry, working with the vendor to increase state and locals to the 256, and that will help us make the interoperability a lot more smoother.
Yeah, understood. And that's a real threat if you have a high level secure system and you start communicating with a lower level system. It's an adversary can use that to try to break the keys, as we know. So, okay, that's good. So wireless by definition, sort of when we're on this topic, spreads its signals over generally a wide area, which makes it susceptible to jamming or potentially eavesdropping. What kind of steps have you all taken to thwart these adversarial actions of eavesdropping and jamming? If you can talk about it, of course.
You want me to take that one, Mr. Paul?
Yeah, that'd be great, Derek.
So as far as, as Walt just mentioned, federally, we're mandated for all federal communication to be encrypted with AES encryption. So even from a wave standpoint, while it may be widely known what communications or what frequencies the FBI operates on, the actual information traveling across those frequencies is encrypted with keys, with AES 256 keys. So that's been the FBI's way of encrypting the data, the communication data that's traveling across those lines.
Yeah, and I think, John, when I think back to the beginning of my career, as a field agent, we weren't always taking advantage of that technology. It was sort of an optional thing. Depending on what we were working, we might engage that encryption in some of our national security work, not so much in our criminal work, but that's certainly changed over the course of my career. And now we're, almost exclusively working in that encrypted environment when it comes to the wireless communications. And, some of that is a credit to folks like Walt and Derek that work to improve our systems, make them more usable, more practical for the field agents. But I can remember a time when it didn't always work right. Or our audio wasn't clear. And of course, that was an incentive not to use those security measures. And so we're well beyond that now. And so it really doesn't matter what type of violation or investigation or operational activity we're undertaking. We're now, again, communicating in that secure environment.
Understood. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember the days when you were using DES, and of course, that the key length wasn't long enough, and pretty soon people were able to break it pretty easily. So I'm going to preempt some other questions a little bit. Just get into the whole hiring issue and try to understand. You guys said you're actively looking for technicians and engineers to work on your wireless systems. What exactly is the process for that? For somebody to apply, for example?
I can start us off on this. So we have, a particular unit at OTD that helps to what we call program manage the electronics technicians across the country. So, we should explain that we have electronics technicians, or ETs, as we like to say in the FBI, certainly assigned at Quantico at the engineering research facility, right, doing OTD's work from a headquarters perspective. But we also have ETs assigned out across our 56 field offices. And they're undertaking a variety of duties there, not only land mobile radio, but they're involved with physical security systems, access control systems, video security systems, secure data networks, doing a lot of hardware and wiring install. So very active in those spaces. And so, we're looking for folks that have broad based experience. We do see a lot of folks that come in, from the military or from other government agencies that have those backgrounds, but certainly not a requirement. We're looking for folks, again, that have been through some formal training, preferably degree based. That they maybe have worked on and had exposure to things like AC and DC circuits, and some of these other technologies that are involved with access and security and radios. We have, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a website, fbijobs.gov. At that website, we post, really all of our FBI positions are posted there. And if you go to the site, there's a STEM, science and technology and engineering portion there, where you can look at STEM positions specifically to see what's available. And we have those postings up there for the electronics technicians. And so you can get more information there about the exact position descriptions, exact requirements, behind those things. These are professional staff positions. In other words, they're not special agent investigator positions. They are specifically doing the electronics work. But they still do require, clean criminal history. It'll require a full security clearance, background investigation. That's standard for all FBI employees, regardless of what position you're in.
Well, that makes sense. So I'm going to back up a bit and talk about another technology that you mentioned earlier. You said you use satellites primarily for administrative purposes. So I'm assuming you mean satellite phones, right? Handheld phones. And but that doesn't meet, as far as I know, the AES 256-bit key requirement, does it? So doesn't that compromise your security in some way, or are you using it for purposes that are not mission critical?
That is correct. They are satellite phones. Primarily, if you think of a Katrina, where everything goes down, the special agent in charge has that satellite phone with him. He can make the call out. So it's not for investigative purposes. It's really for life purposes, and it's in the clear. Therefore, it's not really talking about federal investigations. So we're not mandated by the AES piece on that. Since our radio system is our primary means of communication, that has investigative communication on it, and therefore that must be FIPS certified.
Okay, understood. Understood. But I think Derek mentioned that the HF networks are going to, one of you mentioned the voice on the HF is going to be encrypted as well, or is encrypted. I don't know which. Is that correct?
We are looking at bringing encryption into that piece. But the HF is not our primary communication band either.
That's when everything goes wrong. One
Yeah,
of
yes,
your
it does.
choices of last resort.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and
so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Derek.
no, I just want to piggyback on too what Walt is saying. So I mean, it's different layers of our communication model, right? So naturally, our LMR is going to be the primary, and then we'll have these various fallbacks in the field office that they can use. HF being one, and MSAT or mobile satellite phones being another. Of course, those last two are not intended for law enforcement or investigative purposes. They're more intended for emergency purposes. But for law enforcement investigative, you know, our land mobile radio system is the primary source for those types of communication.
Understood. That makes sense. So I'm going to take a moment just to do a little infomercial. I'm also looking for Barney Scholl to show up to give the other questions. For those of you that are new to RCA, we have been around quite a while. We do these, as I said earlier, these interview series now on a quarterly basis. The next one will be in June, and the one after that will be around October or September timeframe. For those of you that are so inclined, if you have any suggestions about people or industries that or technologies that we could bring into the interviewing sequence, please send an email to Amy Beckham, our administrative director, and make that suggestion, and she'll get that to me. Most of you know me as the former president of RCA for the past 2 years. David Bard is now the president, but he has asked me to continue to do these interviews, which I'm happy to do. I did mention earlier that we have been doing a lot of stuff to support STEM. We have one of our directors, Carol Perry, has for 30 years been visiting middle schools and high schools all over the country and using amateur radio as a vehicle, getting kids interested in radio communications. And it's an uphill battle. I don't have to tell the three of you that today when, you know, a 14-year-old can have a cell phone, call anybody, suddenly being able to talk to somebody in another country is a lot less interesting. But we have a dedicated cadre of young people that have gone from middle school to high school projects that they've actually presented at our technical symposium and on to university level. And last November, we met 2 of them that were in at Georgia Tech studying engineering. So, and one of them has actually gone on to industry. So we've seen the life cycle. It's a little laborious, but it's work that is it has a tremendous return on investment. And so RCA has been committed to doing this for over 30 years. And as I said, we have now a Women in Wireless series and some other things that we're starting to do. The other thing I want to mention is that RCA will be at several trade shows coming up. IWCE is the next one this month. That is typically the most well-attended land mobile radio show, but we will also be in the coming months at ConnectX, which is a Wireless Infrastructure Association. They do primarily 4 and 5G, and in the future 6G base stations and infrastructure equipment, and the UTC, the Utilities Telecommunications Council. Most of you know the utilities are very dependent on wireless communication to stay up and running. And I'm actually in the middle of a snowstorm here in Maine, and I'm hoping that my power doesn't go out or my cable. Okay, so Barney is back with us. Barney, I think we can start. We've kind of covered a little bit of question 1, But why don't you go into the rest of the questions from the audience,
I
please?
think actually a lot is very well covering a lot of these questions that the audience had sent in ahead of time. It's making, I've got to think a little bit more now. Going back to the first question, John, even, you talked about how people can apply for jobs. If, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit hoarse tonight. If someone was thinking about a job, can you recommend backgrounds that they should look into if they see down the road trying to apply for a job? Are there backgrounds that are more desirable to hire at this point in time?
Walt, I'm going to kick that to you, as I'm, more familiar with our special agent recruiting. But I think, especially Walt and Derek, because of your backgrounds and the folks that you see that are working for you and the folks in the field offices that you work with, you might have some insights there on the types of folks we're seeing come in the door.
Yes, sir. And as everyone knows, as your audience knows, the radio world and the IT world is pretty much meshed now. So we're seeing a huge influx of IT background, learning the radio side. We need network architectures. We need network administrators, anything to do with a network. And then we train the radio side as far as the communication piece goes. But I don't want to stop there. The Bureau came outside of the Bureau to find someone like me. So they needed someone with a diverse background with all types of radios. So all the military radios, special radios, classified radios, had a background with 5i, had a background with the Intel community. And they were looking at program managers for that. So we have what's called a management analyst, program analyst. So any type of background, don't be afraid to just browse FBIjobs.gov and just start reading some of the backgrounds of the job postings. Derek?
Yeah, and if I can add to that, what Walt is saying is definitely correct. We're also looking for, as most other major companies, we're looking for STEM folks. The FBI is constantly innovating ways to solve the world's problems, not only from a radio standpoint, but from a technology standpoint. And it's become harder and harder to recruit personnel to come and join the FBI and join the government as a whole for a multitude of reasons. But we are constantly looking for new talent, fresh talent with fresh ideas. Myself, I also have a military background. I forgot to mention that in my bio, but I too came from an electronics background in the military. We're looking for those folks. Those folks are hard chargers, dedicated people, dedicated to the job, getting the mission done. So we're looking for all those folks, but we really have a heavy concentration on STEM to solve these emerging problems that are occurring throughout the world now. So we're looking for everyone, all kind of STEM backgrounds, engineers, technicians, and it's not just the ETs. I do want to make another point too. Our ETs in the field and also Quantico don't just work on radios, as Mr. Paul said. They wear a very large hat on the things they do. So, don't be overwhelmed by what the task could be that could be facing you as an ET in the Bureau, or even as an engineer in the Bureau. There's a job for everyone there to pursue.
Yeah, John, if I could, I would say, I think if we polled across the technical staff in OTD, we'd find a lot of folks who end up working outside of their technical degrees or certifications, right? So we're looking for folks that have that STEM background, but as Walt mentioned, we have IT professionals that are working on radios. We have folks, mechanical engineers that are dabbling in electrical engineering issues and electronics issues. So it is kind of wide open. It does take some discovery. And so I think it's a great idea to, you know, if you're interested in it, or if you're mentoring folks you think might be interested, to really have them take a look at those job descriptions on FBIjobs.gov and really, you know, read in between the lines there of the type of skills and activities that we're looking for, because it is diverse. And, you know, we could get real academic and we could talk about how many credit hours you need in AC and DC circuits and digital microprocessors. I mean, there are some requirements out there, minimum qualifications, but I think you know, if someone is studying, has certifications or a degree that's in that technology field, there's likely is going to be a home for them. And it will really be how they find a home inside the FBI. Many folks come into the FBI into one position and find themselves far from that initial assignment, you know, throughout the course of their career.
Thank you. Very good. That sort of opens up to a couple more questions here, and I'll diverge a slight bit. Well, I wish I could talk better tonight. Walt, you had mentioned that you were an amateur radio operator, and I just wondered if you have seen any merit in a number of the people in RCA have amateur licenses, and there is a movement to encourage younger people to get them. Do you see any merit in that as a way to gain experience or knowledge in this field generally?
Yes, actually, the FBI does have an amateur call sign. It's Kilo 3 FBI, K3 FBI. I'm sure many have reached out and spoken to us. But you know, just like everything, the amateur radio world, it's kind of a lost art that's not being passed down from generation to generation. But you would be surprised the amount of folks in the FBI that I talk to, as soon as you start talking amateur radio, I'm a ham guy, and did you go to last Ham Fest? You know, so we look to have those conversations because that's just another way to have some camaraderie. And then you start talking trade shows with that, and you'll be surprised. A lot of the children and grandchildren of those folks are learning ham radio and are getting that background of radio fundamentals and what it takes for that voice to be transmitted over a radio and get to the other side, whether it's a conventional system, simplex, or you're running it over the most sophisticated land mobile radio system that Derek oversees. So no, absolutely. If someone just has a ham radio background, that's enough. That's enough interest to get people in the door.
Yeah,
Thank
Barney, Walt's calling me out a little bit, so now I'm compelled to confess that I too have a technician class license that I picked up in high school. And, you know, when I think about what that did for me, it taught me about being a responsible operator, right? Understanding the rules of the roads and courtesy. But it led to a career in public safety for me. I got into the fire rescue service, did that for a number of years in college, and which led to part of my bureau career on the SWAT team. And, you know, I think it gives it creates that spark about creativity, about experimentation. And again, for me, I guess just public service and the fact that so many of the ham radio groups, and I saw a question about it earlier, whether it's Aries, Skywarn, you know, those service oriented experiences, we hope lead to potential careers in, you know, serving our country.
Very good. There was a question, actually could all apply to all three of you. And I see you've all come into your careers really from different directions. The question is, what steps did you take to get started in your career? And I sense all three of you sort of come from very different directions to get where you are today. Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I feel like I've said so much already. Derek, you want to give it a shot? Just about your beginning?
Yes, sir. Sure, sure. So as far as coming into the Bureau, it was actually something I've always wanted to do. What really inspired me to pursue a career in the Bureau was events that took place for 9/11. That was something that really hit home for me personally. I felt a need to make a difference for the nation as a whole, and I wanted to join the Bureau in whatever capacity. So from that point on, I wasn't finished with college then, but I knew once I finished college that I was going to pursue a career with the FBI. And if not from an agent standpoint, then from a technology standpoint, to implement ways to prevent what happened during that tragic day. So that kind of led me to hone my educational experience to what the FBI was looking for at that time, which ironically was STEM personnel. They were looking for engineers. And me having a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering was something they were looking for. So it made me a pretty viable candidate to apply for the position at that time. So that's kind of how my path and why, my reasoning for joining the FBI occurred.
After I retired from the military and I started working for another government agency, that took me to embassies around the world. It was communications that dealt with both VHF, UHF, HF, tactical, on the spot radio training, antenna. If you were dropped in the middle of nowhere, how do you make an antenna type of environment? And I partnered with some FBI folks on some things. I trained some, so that kind of got my curiosity going. And like all things, right? The Marine Corps was started in a bar called Ton Tavern. I was eating dinner one night, and there was a bar there, and I just struck up a conversation with the gentleman sitting there, and lo and behold, that was the one who worked for the FBI, and he's the one who actually poached me over to come join. So he's still with us. I just happen to be his boss now. It's just the way that it works out. But he's our lead engineer on our secure technologies platform. But I think, like probably everyone on this panel here, it's a calling. You have a sense of calling, whether it's military, whether it's police, law enforcement, first responder. It's a higher calling, and that's what brought me there.
Slightly different direction, I guess. You did talk before that there was a lot of training and so forth involved within the FBI. Is there any opportunity? I assume there's always opportunity to advance your skills within the FBI. Does that provide people the opportunity to shift their focus within the FBI, or are they pretty well stuck in one career path? And I guess assistant director, your career path has changed quite a bit over the years. But and for you, obviously, it has changed. I wondered if for other people, are there opportunities to diverge through more training and experience to go to different directions within the service?
Well, again, Walt and Derek might be more qualified than I, having done more time in OTD, but my experience being here just my short time has been that OTD is full of folks that have been career-long, members of the division. Folks that have been there 20, 30, 35, even 40 years inside OTD or its predecessor versions within the FBI, working on technology. And when I talk to those folks, I learned that many of them have moved laterally and promoted within OTD, but crossing over into these other areas of technology. We really didn't talk about the breadth of OTD's work. It certainly involves our radio systems, but also video systems, microphones and recording, digital media exploitation, forensic exploitation, digital media collection, parsing, visualization, the care and feeding of our ETs. And also we do have technically trained agents that are also working across our 56 field offices to deploy a lot of the tools and techniques and methods that are developed by OTD and the folks like Walt and Derek. So there are so many different areas that we do work, and I see that folks do move. And as I mentioned before, often find themselves straying a little bit away from maybe what their degree was in, but they have that STEM background and they have that passion for experimentation, for research and development, and exploration of new technologies or new ways of applying those technologies to help the FBI and to help our country. And so I think absolutely there's opportunities for folks to move across, even disciplines and focus areas over the course of a career.
Sounds like a lot of opportunities and challenges for the FBI. Another question that's really going a different direction. In previously, you talked about working between different systems. The question came up: does the FBI use the FirstNet system at all?
I did see that. So I'll maybe start, and then Walt, you can maybe fill in a little bit if you've got extra, or Derek. But we absolutely do participate. In fact, we've had a leadership role for some time in the nationwide public safety broadband network that was born out of the 9/11 Commission. And then since about 2015, actually, the FBI has maintained a senior executive that has been on the First Responder Network Authority Board of Directors. So we're very familiar with FirstNet. And as of, 3 years ago now, we became the single largest agency to adopt the FirstNet service. And we're one of two federal representatives on the FirstNet's Public Safety Advisory Committee. So, we're not only users, but we're heavily involved in its continued evolution and development. And so we've been working closely with them to improve their network, to look at new capabilities. I would have to say in my short time, again, I found them to be very receptive to our input and collaboration. So I don't know, Walt, if you have any other items you might add there.
No, sorry. I think you covered it well. Part of our job in our unit also is looking at future technologies. So as devices come out, we will look at those devices, analyze them, assess them, things like that. So as we're getting into the FirstNet world, we're looking at those FirstNet capable devices because we know the future is going to go into the mesh of LMR and LTE. So we're trying to get ahead of that. The biggest challenge there, again, is we want to have end-to-end encryption. We do not want any transcoding in there. We don't want any trans encryption in there. So we know that there are devices with FirstNet that come with those types of platforms. So we're just in the early stages of that with all of our testing.
Well, we've come to just about the end of our session. Barney, thank you very much for fielding those questions to our three panelists. I want to encourage anybody, again, if you have future interviews that you would like or industry verticals, let us know through Amy. Assistant Director Paul and Walt and Derek, I really appreciate your time tonight. We do these things late because we would like to pick up the West Coast and the Mountain Time people. And that's why we do them at 9 p.m. But you stayed the course with us. This has been very interesting. I certainly learned a lot. I really appreciate you three gentlemen and the work you do to secure the country and keep us safe from the bad guys and girls. And there's a lot of them out there. Thank you, gents.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much,
evening.
John. Thank
Have a
you,
good
Barney.
evening.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Have a
Take
good
care.
evening.